The morning started like any other, the pale San Francisco sunlight stretching across my hardwood floors, a mug of coffee steaming beside my laptop, and a folder of wedding photos glowing on the screen. The couple I'd photographed the previous weekend looked perfect framed beneath a redwood canopy, their hands brushing as sunlight spilled through the trees. For once, everything in my life felt calm. Then, my phone rang. "Hi, Mom," I answered, still clicking through images, half distracted by a shot of the bride's veil fluttering in the wind. Her voice was sharp enough to slice through the air. "Rachel, I need to talk to you about Olivia's wedding." I smiled, thinking she was calling for advice about lighting or angles. "I was going to call her this week, don't," she interrupted. "You're not coming." I froze. "What? You'll ruin her moment," she said. Steady, cold, deliberate. My coffee cup slipped from my hand and shattered against the floor. Hot liquid spread across the wooden planks, bleeding into my prints. For a second, I couldn't breathe. "I'll ruin, what are you talking about?" "You always draw attention," my mother continued, as if this were a simple fact. "Olivia needs the spotlight. It's her time, Rachel. You being there would only make people compare." I pressed a palm against my forehead. "I'm her sister. Don't you think I want her to have a perfect day?" "She deserves that," Mom replied. "You can support her by staying home. Think of it as your gift to her." For a moment, all I heard was the faint hum of my computer and the drip of coffee sliding toward my bare feet. "Mom," I said finally, "that's not a gift. That's exclusion." Her sigh was soft, but the words hit like stone. "You've always needed too much attention. For once, Rachel, try thinking of someone else." The line went silent. I didn't realize she'd hung up until my phone went dark in my hand. The world tilted. My stomach knotted, my throat tightened, and the air in my apartment felt suddenly too thin. I stared at the photos scattered across the floor, images of other people's happiness, the kind I could capture, but never seemed to keep. The irony made me want to laugh, except the sound that escaped my mouth was closer to a sob. I had spent my entire career helping strangers frame their love stories, but when it came to my own family, I was always the one cropped out. I called my father next. He answered on the second ring, his voice warm but cautious. "Rachel, everything okay? Mom just told me I'm not invited to Olivia's wedding," I said, every word tasting bitter. A pause, then a soft exhale. "It's for the best, sweetheart." "The best," I repeated, my voice cracking. "For who? You know how your mother gets," he said gently, as if she were the weather unchangeable. "Olivia wants peace. It's easier this way." "Peace built on my absence isn't peace, Dad. It's control." "Rachel," he sighed, "don't start. You'll make this harder." "I'm not the one making it hard," I said quietly. "You are." He didn't respond, and I hung up before my own silence could betray me. The apartment felt colder now. My computer screen had gone to sleep, and my reflection hovered faintly in the dark glass. I saw a woman in her 30s, successful, independent, recognized for her work, but still the invisible child from Charleston who never seemed to fit the frame. I wiped the coffee from the floor, one ruined print after another, each photograph, a reminder of the perfection I'd been trained to chase. I thought about the last time my mother had praised me, if she ever had, maybe when I was 12 and brought home a painting that won a local competition. But even then, Olivia's piano recital the same day had overshadowed everything. That was the rhythm of our family, her melody, my silence. A knock startled me. The door opened before I could answer. Liam stepped in, tall, calm, his dark hair tousled by the wind from the bay. He held his camera bag in one hand and a paper cup in the other. "Hey," he started, then froze when he saw the mess on the floor. "Rachel, what happened?" I tried to speak, but my throat burned. "She said I'd ruin it," I whispered. He set his things down and crossed the room, crouching beside me. "Who did my mother? Olivia's wedding. They're not inviting me." His eyes hardened. "You're kidding." I shook my head. "Apparently I make everything about myself." He didn't speak for a moment. Then softly, "They've been doing this your whole life." I looked up at him, my vision blurry. Maybe I deserve it. Maybe I am too much. No, he said firmly. You're not too much. They're too small. Something inside me cracked. The tears came fast, silent, and hot. He pulled me into his chest and I let myself cry until the shaking stopped. They'll talk themselves into whatever story makes them feel comfortable, he murmured. That's what people like them do. But you don't have to play that role anymore. I drew back, wiping my face with the sleeve of my sweater. Then, what am I supposed to do? Just stay home while they celebrate? Liam's gaze met mine, steady and certain. No, he said. You make your own celebration. I laughed through the ache. You mean throw my own pity party? I mean, he said, you don't beg for an invitation to your own life. The words hung in the air, heavy and electric. Outside, the late afternoon light began to fade, painting the sky a muted orange. The city lights flickered to life beyond the window, small constellations scattered across the hills. He stood, extended his hand, and pulled me up. Come on, let's clean this up. Then we'll order takeout and talk about something that doesn't involve your family. I nodded, grateful for his steadiness. Together we gathered the ruined photographs, stacking them in a silent pile. When the floor was clean, he handed me a fresh cup of coffee, the kind he knew I liked, no sugar, extra cream. I stared at the steam curling upward, the warmth grounding me. They said I'd ruin her moment, I said quietly. Liam smiled, that slow, deliberate smile of his that always carried a spark of rebellion. Then we'll make our own moment, he said. One they can't erase. The words settled deep inside me, calm and powerful. For the first time all day, I felt my heartbeat steady. Somewhere beneath the ache, a new rhythm began to form, not the beat of humiliation, but of resolve. I looked at him and nodded. Maybe it's time. He tilted his head. Time for what? To stop letting them decide how I'm allowed to shine. Liam reached for my hand, squeezing gently. There's the Rachel I know. Outside, a foghorn sounded from the bay, low and distant. The world kept turning, indifferent to my mother's cruelty, to Olivia's perfection, to all the years I'd spent trying to be small enough to be loved. I took another sip of coffee and glanced at the faint reflection of the two of us in the window, his arm around me, my shoulders finally straight. The skyline shimmered beyond the glass, and I thought maybe for the first time that I didn't need their approval to stand in the light. I used to think I was invisible by choice. Turns out I was trained to be. The studio was quiet except for the hum of my printer and the faint creak of the old wooden floor. I sat cross-legged in front of a wall covered with my photographs, portraits, magazine shoots, fragments of beauty I'd captured for other people. My gaze landed on one particular frame. Two little girls in cotton dresses under a magnolia tree, sunlight spilling through the branches. Olivia stood in the center, beaming, her white dress glowing. I was next to her, a step behind, half cropped out of the photo. Even as kids, we had our assigned places, she in the light, me in the shadow. Maybe it started long before the wedding. Maybe every family picture had already been a warning. I was born in Charleston, South Carolina, to a woman obsessed with appearances and a man who mistook quiet for peace. My mother, Margaret Moore, believed reputation was oxygen. My father, David, believed that as long as Mom was calm, everything else could be endured. Then came Olivia, her perfect blonde curls, her smile that made neighbors say she was born for the spotlight. I was 4 when she arrived, and from that day on, every camera turned toward her. When I was 8, my art teacher submitted one of my drawings to a local contest. It won first place. I remember running home with the ribbon, excited, expecting my mother to hang it on the refrigerator. She smiled politely, then said, "That's nice, honey. But we can't put that up, it'll clutter the kitchen." Olivia's recital program looks much neater. The next day my ribbon was gone, replaced by a glossy photo of Olivia at the piano, grinning under stage lights. That's when I started keeping my achievements in a box under my bed. It wasn't just the small things. Every event seemed choreographed to feature Olivia's brilliance and my restraint. At birthday parties, I was told to let your sister blow the candles first. During Christmas photos, step aside, Rachel, let the light hit Olivia's face. I learned to smile through it, to tilt just enough so the camera could catch her best angle. By 12, I'd already learned the rules of the more household perfection over honesty, composure, over comfort, Olivia over everyone. One Christmas still burns in my memory. I'd saved up for months from babysitting to buy my mother a locket engraved with the initials MM. The morning of, I handed her the box. She opened it, smiled faintly, and said, "Oh, Rachel, that's sweet, but you shouldn't have wasted your money." Then she turned to Olivia, who had just unwrapped a silk scarf. "Darling, that color brings out your eyes." That night I sat by the tree and realized I'd never be enough, not in her version of our family. High school was my escape plan. I joined the yearbook committee not because I liked it, but because it gave me control of the camera. Behind the lens I could decide what deserved to be seen. Every click felt like rebellion. When I was accepted to UCLA on a full scholarship for photography, I thought maybe finally I'd earned her respect. I called her the day I got the acceptance letter. "That's wonderful," she said, "but don't tell Olivia just yet, she's still waiting on her cheerleading results." I don't want her to feel bad. That was the moment I understood my accomplishments would never fit in her narrative. My success was only acceptable as long as it stayed quiet. College in California changed me. I fell in love with light, the way it could shift a story, reveal what people hide. I took classes from dawn until dusk, lived on ramen and adrenaline, and felt alive for the first time. But even then, I called home every week, hoping one day she'd say she was proud. Every conversation ended with the same phrase, "Don't overdo it, Rachel. No one likes a show-off." When I graduated, they didn't come to the ceremony. Olivia had a weekend modeling shoot in Miami, and Mom said travel was too much right now. I walked across that stage alone, smiling for a photographer. I didn't know the crowd clapping for names they'd forget. Sometimes I wonder if that's when I started building my armor, the calm voice, the polite smile, the refusal to react. People said I was composed. The truth was, I was numb. Years later, standing in my San Francisco studio, I looked at that old family photo again. I'd framed it out of habit, maybe as a reminder of where I came from. But now it just looked like evidence, a visual map of how small I'd learned to make myself. I remembered Mom's words from years ago. "You're too intense, Rachel. Men don't like women who take up space." Maybe that's why I became a photographer. I could take up space by giving it away, helping others shine while I disappeared behind the lens. The realization made me dizzy. I sat back against the wall and whispered to the empty room, "I've been editing myself my entire life." The sound of seagulls drifted in from the bay. Afternoon light poured through the tall windows, washing over the photos on the wall. I hadn't noticed before how many of my subjects were women looking away from the camera, soft, polite, deferential. Just like me. I thought about all those years when I was told to dim down so Olivia could glow brighter. How many times had I swallowed words, hid awards, or turned compliments into apologies? Too many to count. My phone buzzed. An email from my mother flashed on the screen. "Olivia's wedding will be featured in Vogue Weddings. Family-only photos. Hope you understand. Family only." The words blurred for a moment, my chest tightening. I laughed softly because what else was there to do? I clicked the email closed, deleted it, and opened my photo library instead. There, folder after folder of couples, smiling families, embracing fathers, crying during toasts. I had documented strangers loving each other more honestly than my own family ever had. I scrolled until one image stopped me, a black and white shot of an older woman standing alone at a beach wedding. She wasn't looking at the couple. She was looking toward the horizon, the wind pushing her hair back. There was strength in her stillness. I remember thinking when I took it, she looks free. Maybe that's what I wanted, not revenge, not validation, just freedom. I turned from the screen and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over the bay, the water glowing gold. My reflection overlapped with the skyline, half in shadow, half in light. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind the frame. When Liam came home later, he found me sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered prints. "You've been at this all day," he said, kneeling beside me. "I found something," I murmured, pointing to that black and white photo of the woman on the beach. She reminds me of what I could be." He studied it, then looked at me. "You will be," he said simply. I smiled faintly. "I just don't know how yet." Liam touched my hand. "You'll figure it out. You always do." After he went to shower, I opened my laptop and created a new folder. The title came to me without thinking: Step into the Frame. Inside, I dragged a photo of myself, rare candid, taken by Liam last year at sunset. I wasn't posing or smiling, just standing there, hair messy, camera hanging from my shoulder, light catching my face. For the first time, I saw myself not as the leftover piece in someone else's picture, but as the subject of my own story. I left the window open as night settled in, letting the sound of waves roll through the apartment. I didn't know it yet, but that small click, the creation of a new folder, was the first step in rewriting everything. Outside, the city lights blinked to life. I stood there, the breeze brushing my skin, and whispered the truth I'd been too afraid to say out loud. I'm done standing in the dark. The first clue came from a tag. I was in my studio editing a fashion campaign when my phone lit up with a notification. Someone had tagged me in a post from a college friend. "Can't wait to see everyone at Olivia's wedding in Miami next month." My stomach dropped. I clicked the photo. There they were, cousins, old neighbors, even family friends I hadn't spoken to in years, commenting with heart emojis and champagne glasses. The caption mentioned my sister by name, but mine was nowhere. I scrolled through the guest list printed on the digital invitation. My name wasn't there. At first, I told myself it had to be a mistake. Maybe the online version was incomplete. Maybe the printed invites hadn't gone out yet. But deep down, I knew better. Exclusion wasn't a glitch in my family, it was a tradition. I dialed my Aunt Joanne, one of the few relatives who still sent me Christmas cards. "Hey, Aunt Jo," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did you get Olivia's wedding invitation?" Her voice faltered. "Oh, yes, dear. Everyone did. It's quite something. Miami Beach designer, floral arrangements, live orchestra. You know your mother, she doesn't do things halfway." "Everyone," I repeated softly. There was a pause. "Rachel." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "It's okay," I said, quickly rescuing her from the awkwardness. "I already know." After I hung up, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Mom. "Don't make this difficult. It's for the best." For the best. I stared at the words, letting them blur. That phrase had followed me my whole life. For the best was how my mother justified every time she pushed me aside. For the best was why my art got replaced by Olivia's piano recitals, why my achievements were brushed off as too much. It wasn't for the best, it was for her comfort. I decided to call Olivia. She answered on the third ring, music thumping faintly in the background. "Liv, I just found out I'm not invited to your wedding." A long exhale. "Rach, I was going to call you," she said, her voice hesitant. "It's just complicated. Complicated how Mom thought it might avoid drama." "Mom," I cut in. "So, you had no say?" She hesitated, and that silence was enough of an answer. "It's her day too," Olivia finally said. "She's been under so much stress, and you know how she gets. I just want things to go smoothly." "Her day too," I repeated, the words scraping my throat. "You're the one getting married, Liv. Unless you're sharing vows with her, don't be cruel." "Cruel?" I almost laughed. "You're excluding your only sister from your wedding, and I'm the cruel one." Her tone hardened. "You always twist things, Rachel. You make everything about you." That line, the one Mom always used, landed like a slap. I didn't argue. I just said, "Good luck, Liv," and hung up. I sat there in silence, the hum of the city outside, muffled by the thick ache pressing against my chest. When Liam came home that night, I was sitting on the floor again, knees drawn to my chest, surrounded by old photo albums I hadn't touched in years. "They did it," I said as soon as he stepped in. "They uninvited me." He dropped his keys on the counter and knelt beside me. "You're serious?" "They said it's to avoid drama. Apparently my existence is a disruption." He frowned. "That's cruel, Rachel. You deserve better than that." I tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "I've been hearing that my whole life. And still I keep expecting them to change. He reached for my hand. You don't owe them another chance. I looked at him, really looked, and realized how steady he was. His calmness didn't come from apathy, it came from strength. You're angry, I said softly. He nodded. Because I've watched you shrink yourself for them. I'm tired of seeing you hurt. I didn't have a response. I just leaned against him, the rhythm of his breathing anchoring me. Later that night, when the apartment was quiet, I opened one of the albums. Photos of birthdays, graduations, holidays, all framed around Olivia. There, I was blurred at the edge, holding the camera or the cake, always slightly out of focus. My chest tightened. I thought of that girl who once believed love meant disappearing. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my best friend Maya calling from New York. Rach, I need to tell you something, she said carefully. I just had coffee with someone who knows Olivia's PR team. They're telling people you're too unpredictable to be around events. I froze. Unpredictable, she said. Your mom told them you have a way of making everything about you, that you'd steal the spotlight. My throat went dry. Of course she did. Are you okay? Maya asked. I swallowed hard. I think I've been okay for them long enough. After we hung up, I sat in the dark, the city lights flickering across the floor. Every memory of being sidelined came rushing back. The birthday Mom canceled. Because Olivia was sick, the graduation. They skipped the holidays they spent without calling. I wasn't surprised anymore, just tired. I found myself whispering, if I vanished tomorrow, would they even notice? The silence that followed was my answer. Sometime after midnight, I called my father. He sounded groggy. Rachel, is something wrong? Did you know I wasn't invited? He hesitated. Your mother thought, don't I cut him off? Don't say it's for the best. He sighed. Sweetheart, sometimes peace means letting things go. I closed my eyes. Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's surrender. He didn't reply. I ended the call before I could start crying again. The next morning I walked along the pier near our apartment, the wind biting against my cheeks. Fishermen were setting up their lines, the air smelled like salt and coffee, and the sun was fighting to break through the fog. I thought about all the times I'd been told to stay small, to be quiet, polite, easy. I stopped and looked at the horizon. Maybe being invisible wasn't protection anymore. Maybe it was a prison. When I got home, Liam was making breakfast. Couldn't sleep, he asked. I went for a walk, I said, taking the mug he handed me. The warmth felt good in my hands. You look different, he said, studying me. I feel different. He raised a brow. Different how I'm done asking to be seen. Liam smiled faintly. Good. Because you never needed their permission. I set the mug down and walked to my desk. My laptop screen still displayed the folder I'd made days earlier. Step into the frame. I opened it and created a new file. The cursor blinked on an empty page. I typed a title without thinking, Project Freedom Wedding. Liam leaned over my shoulder. What's that? I turned to him. Maybe it's time to make my own moment. He didn't ask for details. He just nodded, as if he'd already been waiting for me to say it. That night, after he fell asleep, I stood by the window, watching the lights shimmer on the bay. The wind carried the faint sound of horns and laughter from the street below. Somewhere across the country, my family was planning a celebration I'd been erased from. And yet, for the first time in years, I didn't feel small. They said I'd ruin her wedding, I whispered to the empty room. Maybe I'll create something they can't ruin. Outside, the fog rolled in soft and steady. The city lights blurred into gold, and I let the thought settle in my chest, glowing quietly like the start of something powerful. The plan didn't start as revenge. It started as survival. 3 weeks had passed since the call, the one that officially erased me from Olivia's wedding. My mother hadn't texted again, my father stayed silent, and Olivia's social media overflowed with pastel flowers and oceanfront fittings. Every photo looked airbrushed, unreal, like a magazine spread pretending to be a life. I stopped scrolling when I realized none of it hurt anymore. Just bored me. One rainy afternoon, I was reviewing a gallery from a client's wedding in Lake Tahoe when Liam appeared behind me with 2 cups of coffee. Still thinking about it, he asked. About them, I shook my head. No, about me. He set the cups down, his tone careful. Then maybe it's time you do something for you. The words lingered. Something for me. That night I opened my laptop and searched Italy yacht wedding Amalfi Coast. The images that appeared glowed with sunlight, cliffs, and water so blue it looked painted. For the first time in weeks I smiled. When Liam came out of the shower, I turned the screen toward him. Look, he leaned in, towels still draped over his shoulder. That's stunning. I photographed other people's dream weddings for years, I said quietly. What if we created our own? He blinked as if testing whether I was serious. You mean, actually get married? I nodded. Why not? We've been together 4 years. We always said we'd do it someday. Maybe someday should be now. A grin spread across his face, slow but sure. Then, let's do it right. We stayed up until 2 a.m, sketching ideas on napkins. Sunset ceremony. White jasmine garlands, 20 guests maximum. No press, no drama. The phrase I wrote at the top of the page was simple. A celebration of truth. When I woke the next morning, I half expected to regret it. But instead, I felt lighter. The decision wasn't impulsive. It was clarity. By afternoon, Liam had emailed a contact he knew in Italy, a filmmaker named Giovanni, who managed luxury yachts for private events. Within 2 days, Giovanni replied with photos of a vessel named Elysian Dream. Cream decks, golden railings, the kind of view that could make anyone believe in magic again. It's available in September, Giovanni wrote. Perfect, light, quiet sea. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. The secret felt sacred, like a seed I wasn't ready for the world to touch. A week later, while reviewing contracts, Liam glanced up from his laptop. We'll need to finalize the guest list soon. 20 people, I said. People who actually love us. That narrows it down. We laughed, but both of us knew the unspoken rule: no one from my family. The next day, I met with my friend and fellow photographer Maria at a cafe near Fisherman's Wharf. She'd been one of my first assistants years ago before building her own career. When I told her about the yacht, her eyes widened. Rachel, that's cinematic. It's not about glamour, I said. It's about truth. No staged perfection. Just light air and what's real. She stirred her coffee. So it's a wedding and a statement. Exactly. Maria smiled, but her tone softened. You know your mom's going to find out, right? I took a sip of espresso. I know. She'll make it about her. She always does, I said. But not this time. I invited Maria and her husband Alex, both photographers, to document the ceremony. They understood my vision: no poses, no filters, just authenticity. The following days blurred into planning. I designed mood boards of pale gold and white sunlit textures and natural wood. Every choice felt deliberate. Where Olivia's event screamed excess, mine whispered honesty. Liam handled logistics, permits, deposits, international paperwork. I focused on the details that mattered: the music, the light, the story. By the end of the week, I could see it clearly in my head, the yacht floating between sea and sky, a world untouched by judgment. Then the first message arrived. It was from my cousin Amanda. Hey, I heard you're planning something big. Your mom's asking questions. My fingers paused above the keyboard. Just a trip, I typed back. She sent a winking emoji. Sure, Rachel. A trip with floral designers and a videographer. Good luck keeping that quiet. I stared at the screen, pulse quickening. I hadn't told anyone outside our small circle, which meant someone had leaked it. Maybe Maria mentioned it to a mutual friend. Maybe someone overheard. But deep down, I knew exactly who would make it spread. My mother had always had a talent for turning whispers into weapons. The next day, my inbox filled with wedding industry newsletters, all forwarding the same subject line: exclusive second more daughter planning, rival wedding in Italy. I stared at the headline, equal parts disbelief and disgust. The article was full of vague sources and snide commentary phrases, like family tension and sibling rivalry. The comments section was worse. I closed my laptop before the nausea could rise. Liam found me an hour later, sitting on the floor, camera in my lap. "They know," I said. He sighed, sat beside me, and brushed a strand of hair from my face. "Let them talk. It's not just gossip," I murmured. "They're painting me as some kind of jealous villain." He leaned closer. "Rachel, people believe whatever makes them comfortable. Let them have their fiction. You'll be living the truth." I wanted to believe that, but I could already hear my mother's voice echoing in my head, how she'd spin this to her friends, how she'd clutch her pearls and say, "We tried to include Rachel, but she's always been dramatic." The next morning, my prediction came true. An email from her arrived just before sunrise. "Rachel, I can't believe you would stoop so low. Olivia is devastated. How could you do this to her?" To us, I didn't reply. I didn't need to. She didn't ask to understand, she just wanted control. By afternoon, Olivia's Instagram story featured a quote in fancy script: "Some people shine brighter by dimming others. Don't let them." Underneath a caption, "No names needed." Subtlety was never her strength. Maria texted me screenshots followed by "Ignore it." This is exactly what they want, attention. But I wasn't angry, not anymore. Just tired. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, I sat by the window, with a blanket draped over my shoulders. Liam handed me a mug of tea. What if he said softly, "We treated this not as a fight but as proof? Proof of what that peace exists without their permission." I looked at him and something inside me settled. He continued, "You've spent your whole life trying to be part of their story. Maybe it's time to write your own." I smiled faintly. "Already started." He tilted his head. "What's it called?" "Light at Sea," I said. He raised his mug. "To light at sea, then." We clinked cups, the sound soft but final, like a door closing behind us. Later that night, while he slept, I reopened my laptop. I deleted every email chain from my mother, every gossip article, every thread tying me to their drama. Then I opened a blank document and began outlining our ceremony, guest names, music, lighting cues. Each word felt like reclaiming ground I'd long been told I didn't deserve. When I finished, I wrote one final line at the bottom of the page. "No one gets to decide how much space I take anymore." Outside, the city was quiet, the bay glowing faintly under the moon. I thought of my mother's voice, of Olivia's curated perfection, of every family photo where I stood half in shadow, and for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be in their frame at all. I wanted to build my own. By the time the fog rolled off the bay that morning, I had stopped checking my phone. The gossip sites had moved on to some celebrity breakup, and my mother's last emails sat unopened, flagged but ignored. The silence that followed felt like oxygen. Liam noticed the difference before I did. "You're quieter," he said one evening as we sat on the balcony legs, tangled, the city humming below. "I think I'm finally out of their frequency," I said. "It's peaceful here," he smiled. "Then let's keep it that way." The next day, we met Maria and Alex for brunch near Union Square to talk through plans for Italy. They arrived with their cameras slung over their shoulders and the kind of creative energy that always felt contagious. Maria spread out a small notebook full of sketches across the table, sunset lighting angles, floral layouts, candid poses that captured movement. "I've been dreaming about this shot," she said, tracing a line with her pen. "You walking across the deck with the horizon behind you. The light at that hour, it's almost holy." Alex nodded. "We'll shoot documentary style. Real moments only. No posing, no fake smiles." "That's all I want," I said. "Authenticity." Maria looked up at me, her voice soft but firm. "Rachel, this isn't revenge, it's reclamation. You know that, right?" I nodded. "It stopped being about them the minute I chose the sea." Liam raised his glass. "To new narratives." We clinked our glasses together, laughter spilling easily between us. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of community that didn't require shrinking. That evening back at the apartment, Liam started building a shared folder for the project flights, vendors' legal documents, backup plans. I watched him from the couch, his focus steady, his hands moving with calm precision. He didn't just love me, he anchored me. "What are you thinking?" he asked without looking up. "I'm thinking about how different this feels," I said. "Every decision is ours. No guilt, no expectation," he smiled. "That's what freedom looks like." Later that night, while he reviewed logistics, I wandered into my studio. The smell of photo paper and ink wrapped around me like something familiar and grounding. I spread prints across the floor, couples laughing, children dancing, grandparents wiping tears during vows. Moments of authenticity I'd captured for others. Then I noticed one photograph I hadn't looked at in years, a black and white shot of a father holding his daughter's hand as he walked her down the aisle. The light hit just right, half shadow, half gold. The caption I'd once written for the magazine submission came back to me. "Even the smallest step toward love is rebellion against fear." I stared at that image, realizing how much of my life had been spent walking beside people's joy, never fully inside it. A notification pinged on my phone, a message from an unknown number. "Rachel, it's your father. Your mother's upset. Please call when you can." I stared at the text for a long time, then locked the screen. My mother had always used him as her messenger. I wasn't going to let that happen again. Instead, I called Maria. "I want to do a test shoot," I said. "Something to set the tone for the yacht." She didn't ask questions. Tomorrow. Sunrise. Baker Beach. The next morning, the city was still asleep when we arrived. The sand was cold beneath my feet, the horizon a soft gray before dawn. Maria adjusted her camera settings as I stepped barefoot toward the water. "Forget the pose," she called. "Just walk. Let it be real." The first light cracked open the horizon, painting everything gold. I closed my eyes and lifted my face to the wind, the salt air sharp and clean. For a second I forgot the cameras, the family, the noise. There was only me, the sea, and the sound of waves pulling at the shore. When Maria showed me the shots later, I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked free. She smiled. "That's the woman who's going to walk down that yacht deck." By afternoon, I'd filled my walls with printed drafts of those photos. I called it the Freedom Board. Each image was a reminder light doesn't ask permission to exist. That night, Liam brought home takeout and a bottle of white wine. We sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by images of my new beginning. "I've been thinking," he said, tapping the table with his chopsticks. "We should film the process. A short documentary. Not for publicity, just for you." I laughed. "You're turning my wedding into a film set, not a set," he said. "A record. One day, when you doubt yourself again, you'll have proof of how far you came." The idea made my chest warm. What would we even call it, he thought for a moment. "Light at Sea. Same as the wedding theme." I nodded slowly. "It's perfect." He leaned back against the wall, smiling. "We'll hire Marco and his crew in Amalfi. Quiet professionals. They'll capture everything. No interference." As we talked, I could feel the shape of something larger, forming a story that wasn't just about defiance but about creation, about reclaiming beauty as my own. By the end of the week, everything was in motion. Deposits paid, invitations designed. We finalized the guest list: Maria and Alex, a few close friends, no one who made me question my worth. Then, one evening, while I was backing up files, a new email popped into my inbox. The subject line read, "Reconsider what you're doing." No sender name, no signature, but I knew that phrasing like I knew my own reflection. My mother. The message was short: "Olivia is devastated. People are talking. You're embarrassing this family. Cancel your plans before it goes too far." I read it twice, then pressed delete. When Liam came into the room, he saw my expression. "Another email, yay." He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Then I'll double-check the security on all bookings. No one cancels anything without our say." I turned to him, surprised. "You already thought of that," he smiled. "I know how they operate." I'm not letting them ruin this for you. The steadiness in his voice made my throat tighten. You're my anchor, I whispered. He kissed my forehead. You're the light. Anchors don't shine. That night I dreamed of the sea, endless and calm, not the stormy kind my mother warned me about. I woke with a faint taste of salt on my lips and sunlight creeping across the sheets. I got up, made coffee, and opened my laptop to check Giovanni's latest email. The subject line read, Elysian Dream Confirmed. September 12th. The photos attached took my breath away, the golden deck, the curved railings catching the sunset, the soft ripple of the Mediterranean below. It wasn't just a venue, it was a declaration. When Liam joined me, still sleepy, I turned the screen toward him. It's official, I said. He wrapped his arms around me from behind. Then it's happening. I leaned into him, a quiet certainty settling in my chest. They took so much space in my story, I whispered. Now I'm taking it back. Outside, the morning fog burned away, revealing a sky so bright it almost hurt to look at. I stood at the window, letting the sunlight touch my face. For once, I didn't step back. I stayed there still and strong and let myself shine. Freedom didn't come with wings. It came with contracts, spreadsheets, and a growing sense that my mother would eventually find out. 3 weeks after confirming the yacht, our living room had transformed into a command center. There were fabric swatches pinned to the walls, color palettes spread across the coffee table, and a corkboard covered in photos of the Amalfi Coast. Liam sat on the couch, surrounded by open tabs, flights, legal documents, weather forecasts. I was hunched over my laptop, drafting the timeline. Can you believe it? He said, looking up from the screen. In 3 months, we'll be on that deck in the sun, not caring about a single thing they say. I smiled, half distracted by Giovanni's latest message. Sunset ceremony confirmed. September 12th will be magical. It was happening. Really happening. That night, after Liam went to bed, I stayed up scrolling through references for flowers, dresses, and menus. It wasn't about luxury. It was about truth. Every detail I chose felt like an act of rebellion, not loud or vengeful, but quietly defiant. By morning, I'd created a digital mood board labeled Light at Sea, ivory, satin, olive, leaves, white jasmine. Every image pulsed with simplicity. When Liam woke, I showed him my screen. He leaned in, eyes soft. This feels like you. That's the point, I said. It's not about outshining anyone, it's about no longer dimming. We worked all day finalizing budgets and guest lists, 20 people no more. Only those who'd stood by us when things got hard. Maria and Alex were confirmed as photographers. Marco's documentary crew would capture everything quietly in the background. That evening, as the sun set behind the Golden Gate, Liam opened a bottle of wine. So he said, raising his glass to freedom done properly. I laughed. To freedom with a spreadsheet. We clinked glasses, and for a moment the noise of the past didn't exist. But peace never lasted long in my family. The first message came the next morning from Amanda, my cousin. Your mom heard about Italy. She's losing it. Said something about a family scandal. What's going on? My chest tightened. I typed back quickly. It's just a private trip, nothing big. She replied within seconds. Sure, Rachel. That's what she said before calling Aunt Carol, crying about you humiliating them. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. It hadn't even been a week since we'd booked the yacht. When Liam came home from a shoot that afternoon, I told him. She found out, I said. He sighed, already expecting it. Of course she did. She probably has someone at the bank keeping tabs. I gave a humorless laugh. Knowing her, she probably interrogated the florist. What do you want to do? He asked. Nothing, I said. If I react, she wins. Silence will bother her more than words ever could. By evening, my phone was buzzing nonstop. Texts from relatives, half pretending to check in, half fishing for information. One even said, I heard your fiancé is a billionaire. True, I tossed the phone onto the couch. Liam picked it up and turned it face down. Let them gossip. It's their sport. I just don't understand how something that's supposed to be joyful turns into ammunition, I said. He looked at me for a long time. Because your joy doesn't serve them. That's the difference. The next day, a new storm hit. A gossip blog posted a headline that made my stomach twist: a strange sister of socialite Olivia Moore planning rival yacht wedding in Italy. The article quoted an anonymous source, clearly my mother, claiming I'd been struggling for attention and that the wedding was a desperate attempt to outshine the real celebration. The phrase, "the real celebration," echoed in my head until I had to shut my laptop. Liam found me in the kitchen staring at nothing. "What did she do?" he asked quietly. "She's talking to the press now," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck. Then we moved faster. "Let's secure everything. Giovanni vendors the guest list. No one gets access unless we authorize it directly." I nodded, forcing a breath. "They can't sink us unless we let them." For the rest of the week, we worked like soldiers preparing for battle. Liam drafted confidentiality agreements. Maria reached out to trusted suppliers in Italy. I sent final deposits and backups of every file. Every click of my mouse felt like building a wall between me and the family that had never protected me. But in quiet moments, the ache returned. One night, I found myself scrolling through old family photos again. There was Olivia, age 10, blowing out birthday candles while I stood in the corner clapping. My mother's hand rested proudly on her shoulder. Not mine. Even back then, I'd been written out of the story. I closed the photo app and whispered to the empty room, "Not this time." The next morning, Maria called. "I have something you should see," she said. "But promise not to freak out." "Maria," I said, already bracing myself. "Your mother sent an email to a vendor here. She tried to cancel your flower order." I blinked. What she pretended to be you. Used your name. The florist contacted me to confirm because it felt off. For a moment, I couldn't even process it. She really tried to sabotage my wedding. Maria's voice softened. "You okay?" Honestly, I said. "I'm impressed. That level of pettiness takes commitment." When I told Liam, his jaw tightened. "Enough," he said. "I'll handle it." He spent the rest of the day on calls, confirming contracts, switching contact emails to his business account, setting up privacy measures. By nightfall, we had everything secured under password-protected servers. "She won't touch another thing," he said finally. I smiled faintly. "You really think of everything," he shrugged. "I just don't like bullies." That night we sat by the window watching rain slide down the glass. The city lights shimmered like stars trapped underwater. "She'll probably call again," I said. "Let her," he replied. "The louder she gets, the more peaceful we'll look in comparison." I laughed quietly. "That's almost poetic." "It's strategic," he said, smiling. "And poetic." For a moment we sat in silence, listening to the rain. The air felt cleaner somehow, as if the storm outside was washing something away. By the weekend, we'd shifted focus back to creation. Liam surprised me by setting up a projector in the living room. When I came in, the wall was filled with clips of the Amalfi Coast waves' sunlight cliffs. He'd edited them together with soft piano music. "What is this?" I asked. "A visual rehearsal," he said. "For when you start doubting why we're doing this." I stood there watching the footage. The horizon stretched endlessly, the light changing from gold to rose. I felt my shoulders relax. "This," I whispered, "is why." He slipped his arm around my waist. "Then remember it. No matter what they say, this is the life you're building." That night I lay awake, listening to the hum of the city and the distant sound of waves breaking somewhere beyond the shore. My mother's words still echoed faintly in my head, but they no longer pierced. They just faded. I reached for my phone and typed a message draft I'd never send. "You taught me to make myself small, Mom. I finally learned I don't have to." Then I deleted it. Some truths didn't need to be delivered. They just needed to be lived. Outside, dawn was breaking. The first streak of light slipped through the curtains, painting the room in soft gold. I stood, walked to the window, and let it hit my face. It wasn't revenge I felt anymore. It was freedom, quiet, grounded, and entirely mine. The first storm didn't come from the sea, it came from my mother's Facebook post. I was sipping coffee on the balcony when Maria called. "Don't panic," she said, which of course guaranteed that I would. "But your mom just went public." I grabbed my phone and opened Facebook. There it was, a photo of Olivia, standing in her wedding dress, fitting, smiling like she'd swallowed the sundae. The caption read, "Proud of our graceful daughter who never felt the need to compete for attention." Some people could learn from that. The words hit harder than I expected. I scrolled through the comments, family members, friends of my parents, distant cousins, all cooing over the post. "She's an angel, so elegant," and then a few that made my stomach tighten. "Unlike her sister, there's always one who causes trouble." I closed the app before I threw my phone. By lunchtime, my inbox was full of messages. Some from extended family pretending to check in, others more direct. "Rachel, your mom is heartbroken. You should fix this before it gets worse." I deleted them all. When Liam came home, I handed him my phone. "Look at this circus." He scrolled through the post, his jaw tightening. "She really wrote that publicly. Apparently passive-aggressive parenting gets better engagement than cat videos," I said. He set the phone down. "Ignore her." "I am. But she's not ignoring me. She's rewriting the story." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. "Then tell your own." I stared at him, his calmness grounding me. "You make it sound simple. It is. You just have to stop defending yourself to people who already decided what to believe." That night I drafted a caption for my photography page. Nothing defensive, nothing bitter. Just a photo of the ocean, endless and calm, with the words, "Sometimes silence is the loudest rebellion." By morning it had 3,000 likes. The comments poured in, clients, fellow artists, strangers. This spoke to me. "You're inspiring. Thank you for reminding us that peace is power." I didn't respond to any of them, but something shifted inside me. I realized that by saying nothing, I had already said everything. My mother, however, wasn't done. 2 days later, an email from a wedding blog landed in my inbox. "We'd love to feature a piece on your family's dynamic. We've spoken with your mother, and she says there's been some misunderstanding. Care to clarify?" I stared at the screen, equal parts furious and exhausted. She'd spoken to the press again. "Unbelievable," I muttered. Liam looked up from his laptop. "She's escalating. She wants to control the narrative," I said. "She's always wanted that." He stood, walked behind me, and gently massaged my shoulders. "Then stop fighting for space in her story." "I'm not fighting," I said, though my voice betrayed me. "I'm just tired of being her villain." He kissed the top of my head. "Then stop auditioning for her forgiveness." The words hit like truth. The next morning I got a text from my father. "Can we meet?" I hesitated for hours before replying. Finally I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown, the same one he used to take me to when I was in college. He looked older, smaller somehow, his suit too big for him. "Rachel," he said, forcing a smile. "It's been too long." "Whose idea was this?" I asked. He sighed. "Your mother's upset. Olivia too." "I'm sure they are. They just want peace." I laughed softly. "Their version of peace requires me to disappear." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You know your mother loves you in her own way." "Dad," I said quietly, "you've been saying that my whole life. Maybe it's time we both admit it's not love, it's control." He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "She doesn't mean to hurt you. Intent doesn't erase damage," I said. "You were supposed to protect me." The silence between us stretched thin. He stirred his coffee, then said softly, "I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. But it was something." When I got home, I found Liam on the phone, pacing. "Yes," he said sharply. "I understand." But that call wasn't authorized. He hung up and turned to me. "Your mother called Giovanni." I froze. "What, she tried to cancel our booking?" "Said you were having a breakdown and shouldn't be making big decisions." I stared at him, a mix of fury and disbelief flooding through me. "She actually did that?" "She did," he said. "But Giovanni called me directly to confirm. He told her nothing." For a moment I couldn't speak. Then slowly a laugh bubbled up. She really tried to sabotage my wedding. Not tried, Liam said, wrapping an arm around my waist. Failed. That night I poured myself a glass of wine and stood on the balcony watching the city lights blur into gold. My phone buzzed, another email from her full of guilt and accusations. I deleted it without reading. They taught me fear. Liam taught me calm. The next few days blurred into quiet determination. I threw myself into preparations with Maria and Alex. We tested camera angles in my studio, played with lighting setups, and mocked up timelines. One afternoon, Maria handed me a set of proofs from our test shoot at Baker Beach. "Look at this," she said, flipping through the stack. The photo stopped me cold. I was standing barefoot in the surf, hair blowing in the wind, face turned toward the horizon. The light hit me like I was glowing from the inside. "Wow," I whispered. Maria smiled. "That's the woman who doesn't need approval." I ran my fingers over the image, the texture smooth beneath my skin. For once, I believe it. By Friday, Olivia's wedding had hit the tabloids again. $800,000 budget, Miami Beach celebrity chef imported flowers. Every headline screamed perfection. But all I saw was emptiness. That night, Olivia called. "Hey," she said, her voice strained. "Can we talk?" I hesitated, then answered. "Sure, Mom's been losing her mind," she said. "She says you're planning some spectacle." "It's called a wedding," I said evenly. "Why can't you just wait until after mine?" I laughed. "You mean after your moment, Rachel? This isn't funny," she snapped. "You're ruining things. Everyone's talking. Everyone's always talking, Liv." I just stopped listening. She went quiet. "You sound different." "I am different," I said. "I stopped letting you define me." She sighed, and for a second her voice softened. "Mom's scared of losing control. She lost it the moment I said no." "Then what happens now?" "Now," I said, "I live." We sat in silence for a moment before she whispered, "I hope it's worth it." "It already is." When I hung up, I realized something had shifted. The anger was gone. The fear, too. All that remained was clarity. The next morning, I posted a new photo on my feed, a shot of the ocean taken at dawn, waves calm and endless. The caption read, "Peace doesn't mean quiet. It means knowing which noise not to invite." Within an hour, the comments poured in. "This is powerful. You're glowing. Teach me how to be this calm." I smiled, sipping my coffee as the city came to life outside my window. They thought they'd destroyed my reputation. All they did was make people listen. The morning we boarded the yacht, the air felt different, like the world had finally exhaled for me. The dock in Naples was alive with quiet motion. Crew members moved gracefully, ropes coiling, sunlight flashing off polished rails. I stood beside Liam, holding my camera in one hand, my passport in the other, feeling a weight I'd carried my whole life finally loosen its grip. The Elysian dream waited ahead, ivory decks glowing under the Italian sun, the water so blue it almost hurt to look at. Liam turned to me, a grin breaking across his face. "You ready?" "I think I've been ready for years," I said. He kissed my temple. "Then let's go find your light." We stepped onto the deck, and something shifted. It wasn't grand or cinematic. It was quiet, like stepping into a life that finally fit. As we pulled away from the shore, Naples shrinking behind us, I watched the horizon open. The sea stretched endlessly, waves shimmering like liquid glass. I'd spent so long thinking freedom would feel loud, triumphant. Instead, it was still. It was peace. Giovanni greeted us on board, his Italian accent warm and melodic. "Signora Moore." "Ah, forgive me, Signora Carter," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Welcome home." I smiled. "It feels like one." He showed us to our suite floor, to ceiling windows overlooking the water-white linen curtains, swaying with the breeze. Jasmine-scented candles flickered on the nightstand. I ran my fingers along the railing, the sunlight, warm beneath my skin. "This doesn't feel real," I whispered. Liam leaned in. "It's real. You built it." The yacht glided forward, the engines low and steady. By evening, we were miles from the coast, surrounded only by sea and sky. The water turned from turquoise to gold as the sun dipped lower, and I stood barefoot on the deck, camera in hand, chasing the light. Every frame felt personal, a reflection of everything I'd fought for. I didn't pose, didn't hide, didn't shrink. For once the lens was mine to control. That night after dinner on the upper deck, we watched the stars scatter above us. Liam handed me a glass of wine. So he said softly, "Do you ever think about calling them every day?" I admitted. "But not out of guilt. Out of habit." He nodded. And now I took a slow sip, letting the salt air fill my lungs. Now I realize their silence is my freedom. He reached for my hand. "Then keep it." I set the glass down and pulled an envelope from my bag, a small weathered one with my mother's handwriting. I'd kept it for years unopened. Her last apology that wasn't an apology, mailed after one of our countless arguments. I opened it for the first time. "Rachel, one day you'll understand why I made things the way they are. Love is sacrifice." I laughed softly. She really believed that. Liam tilted his head. "You gonna keep it?" I shook my head. "No." I folded the letter, placed it inside another envelope, and scrawled across the front in black ink, "Return to sender." Then I walked to the edge of the deck and let it go. The wind caught it, lifting it for a heartbeat before it vanished into the dark water below. Sometimes, I said, you have to let things sink to stay afloat. The next morning I woke to the sound of gulls and the scent of coffee. Liam stood by the window, his hair ruffled, a mug in his hand. "Good morning, Mrs. Carter," he said. I grinned. I could get used to that. We spent the day sailing south along the Amalfi coast. The cliffs rose like ancient guardians, dotted with pastel villas and lemon groves. Giovanni arranged for a small stop in Positano, where we explored narrow streets, sampled gelato, and bought fresh flowers for the ceremony. The florist, an elderly woman with kind eyes, handed me a bundle of jasmine. "Per la fortuna," she said. "For luck." By late afternoon we were back on board. Maria and Alex arrived with their gear, hugging me tightly. "You're glowing," Maria said. "It's the sea," I said, laughing. "It washes everything false away." They began setting up their cameras for test shots while I reviewed the lighting for the next evening's ceremony. The golden hour here was unlike anything I'd ever seen, soft and deep, the kind that made every surface shimmer. As the crew adjusted the floral arrangements, I watched the horizon. "It's strange," I said quietly to Liam. "All this time I thought I needed to prove something to them. But now standing here, I don't." He smiled. "That's because you finally built something that doesn't need their approval." I looked at him and realized how true that was. My mother couldn't control this light, this peace. She couldn't rewrite this version of me. That evening the sky turned from gold to rose. We sat on the deck with our friends, drinking wine and listening to the water. The wind carried laughter across the waves. It felt like the world had gone quiet just to let us breathe. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but the area code made me pause. "Charleston," I answered. "Hello, Rachel." It was my father. His voice was rough, tired. "I heard about Italy. I just wanted to say, be happy." I blinked. "Thank you, Dad. Your mother doesn't know I called." "I figured," I said softly. "She's not well, not in the way she pretends. But maybe one day she'll see what she's lost." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of the waves filled the space between us. "Take care of yourself," he said finally. "I will." When the call ended, I stood at the railing, the phone still in my hand, the sea stretching endlessly before me. Liam joined me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. "I think I finally am." The next morning, the crew began decorating for the ceremony. Olive branches lined the railings, jasmine garlands twisted through the posts. Maria snapped photos of every detail while Alex checked his light meters. "Tomorrow," Giovanni said, passing by with a grin. "The weather will be perfect. Even the sea knows when to behave for love." As night fell, I sat on the deck alone watching the stars shimmer across the black water. My reflection merged with the sky, half sea, half starlight. Liam came up behind me, resting his chin on my shoulder. Nervous? Not really, I said. It feels right. He kissed the side of my neck. Then it is. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of jasmine through the air. I thought of my mother's voice, sharp and cold, telling me I'd ruin things just by showing up. And then I thought of tomorrow, standing barefoot on this deck, surrounded by people who saw me, loved me, celebrated me. I used to think freedom was running away, I whispered. Now I know it's staying exactly where I am. He smiled against my skin. You finally made peace with the light. I turned, meeting his eyes. No, I said. I became it. The horizon shimmered as the first light of dawn began to touch the sea. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being seen. The sea was calm, but my heart raced. Golden sunlight spilled across the deck of the Elysian Dream, turning every inch of the ivory railings to gold. The smell of jasmine and salt filled the air as waves lapped gently against the hull. I stood inside the cabin, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My dress was simple silk that caught the light like water, a soft drape that moved with every breath of wind. No sequins, no veil, no lace. Just me. I ran my fingers over the fabric, thinking how different this was from the version of love my mother sold me. Hers had always been wrapped in rules: look perfect, smile softly, stay quiet. Today I chose the opposite. Ready, Liam's voice floated in from the doorway. I turned, breath catching. He was in a linen suit, sleeves rolled up, the sunlight catching in his hair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he smiled, that steady, grounding smile that had carried me through the storm. You're beautiful, he said softly. So are you, I whispered. Maria's voice echoed from above deck. It's time we stepped out into the light. The breeze lifted the jasmine garlands that draped the railings, scattering their scent into the open air. 20 guests waited in a loose semicircle, friends who had become family, the people who'd stayed through the mess, the silence, the rebuilding. The Mediterranean shimmered behind them, endless and bright. The officiant smiled warmly. Are we ready? Liam reached for my hand. Always. As I took my first step down the narrow aisle, the guitarist began to play Northern Sky by Nick Drake, the song we'd found on a road trip years ago when life still felt uncertain. Every note wrapped around me like a memory. For once there was no stage, no spotlight, no expectation, just truth. When I reached him, the world went still. I could hear only the waves and the quiet rhythm of my own heartbeat. The officiant spoke, his voice low and kind. Marriage isn't about merging two lives. It's about honoring two truths. Liam squeezed my hand and began his vows. Rachel, I promise to see you. Not just look at you, but really see you. To celebrate your light instead of dimming it. To build a life where your joy doesn't have to shrink to fit. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I'd spent years crying for the wrong things. I unfolded my small paper, my handwriting shaky but deliberate. I promised to stand tall beside you, to create beauty without apology, to love without asking permission. The wind caught my hair as I spoke, and I swear I could feel something release the last fragment of fear I'd been carrying. When we exchanged rings, the sun dipped just enough to turn the sea into molten gold. Maria moved silently, capturing each moment. I saw her eyes glisten behind the lens. The officiant smiled. I now pronounce you husband and wife. For a second time stopped. Then Liam leaned in and kissed me, slow and sure, while the wind carried applause through the air. I laughed against his lips, the sound raw and real. We did it, he smiled. You did it. As guests clapped, Maria motioned for me to turn toward the light. One more shot, she called. I turned, and in that exact moment the sun hit the water behind us. The entire world seemed to glow. Liam's hand found mine. Maria clicked the shutter. Later, when she showed me the image, I couldn't speak. We stood framed by the horizon, the light wrapping around us like a halo. The reflection of the sea made our outlines shimmer. It wasn't perfect, it was alive. Dinner followed intimate and unhurried. We ate pasta and fresh seafood under strings of soft lights, the air full of laughter and music. There was no grand toast, no forced speeches, just joy. Giovanni raised a glass. "To courage," he said in his lilting accent. "Because love without courage is only decoration." The table erupted in cheers. I caught Liam's gaze across the table, his eyes soft with pride. As the night deepened, the documentary crew moved quietly among us, capturing fragments of laughter, clinking glasses, dancing barefoot under the stars. For once, I didn't feel like the observer behind the camera, I was the story. Later, Maria approached with her camera. "There's something you should see," she said, scrolling through the shots. She stopped at one. "This one. It's magic." I took the camera from her hands. It was the photo from earlier, the halo moment. My breath caught. "It's going to break the internet," she said, half joking. "It's just a picture," I said automatically, though I couldn't stop staring. "No," she said gently. "It's art." I didn't know then that she was right. Liam came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my waist. "What are you looking at?" "Our proof," I said quietly. He kissed the top of my head. "Proof of what? That light always finds its way home." The music softened and guests began to drift toward the edge of the deck. Maria turned on the projector she'd brought and played a short montage clips from our time on the yacht, the sea at sunset, laughter spilling through the wind. It wasn't a spectacle, it was a love letter to authenticity. Giovanni stepped forward with a small toast. "I have seen many weddings," he said, his accent thickening with emotion. "But true love requires courage to claim your own story. Tonight, you have done that." Applause rippled across the deck. I looked at Liam, my chest full and steady. "We did more than that," I whispered. "We changed the story." When the music swelled again, we danced barefoot, the wooden deck warm beneath our feet. The Mediterranean stretched out behind us, endless and forgiving. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn the light. I simply existed in it. At some point in the night, Maria uploaded one photo, the halo shot, to her photography page just to back it up. She didn't tag us. No names, no captions, just an image. By morning, it had already been shared thousands of times. I didn't know any of that yet. I only knew the quiet joy of watching the sea reflect the first light of dawn as I leaned against Liam's shoulder. "You realize this is the first time I haven't felt like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop," I said. He smiled. "Maybe because you stopped letting anyone else tie your laces." I laughed softly, resting my head against him. The sky brightened, soft pinks melting into gold. The yacht drifted gently, the scent of jasmine still thick in the air. For years I'd captured other people's happiest moments, always behind the lens, always invisible. Now I was the story, and for the first time in my life I didn't just take the picture, I lived it. By morning the world knew my name. I woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin and the faint hum of the yacht's engines. Liam was still asleep beside me, his breathing slow and even. My phone vibrated on the nightstand again and again until the sound pulled me upright. I blinked at the screen, hundreds of notifications, messages from numbers I didn't recognize, emails stacked like dominoes. Maria had left 3 voicemails. I pressed play. Her voice was half breathless, half laughing. "Rachel, it's everywhere. The photo. You're trending in 17 countries. Vogue, Harper's Elle, they all reposted it. You broke the internet, girl." My pulse quickened. I opened Instagram. The image, the one Maria had uploaded, the halo shot, was on my feed, my explore page, every corner of social media. "The most authentic wedding of the decade," one headline read. The comments flooded beneath it. "This is real love." "Who is she?" I cried, looking at this. I set the phone down and pressed both hands to my face. I hadn't planned to show the world anything, yet somehow the world had found me. Liam stirred, blinking awake. "What's going on?" I handed him the phone. He scrolled through it for a full minute, then looked up, a slow smile spreading. "Well, Mrs. Carter, you're officially viral," I groaned. "Oh God, I didn't even tag anyone." "Doesn't matter," he said. Truth travels fast. By noon, my inbox was a flood of requests. Interviews Sponsorship offers even a TED Talk inquiry titled Authenticity in Modern Love. Harper's Bazaar wanted to feature the wedding under Stories That Redefine Perfection. I laughed, a disbelieving sound that turned into something close to tears. Maria called again. "People are calling you the light at sea bride. You've started a movement without trying." I didn't know what to say. By afternoon, the story had evolved into myth. Blogs described how I'd been excluded from a family wedding, but built her own masterpiece. Hashtags appeared: number revenge by Grace, number light at sea, number stand tall. Meanwhile, in the United States, my mother's silence cracked into chaos. Amanda texted, "Your mom's freaking out. Olivia's PR team can't control the press. Everyone's talking about you." Then another message followed, CNN style, "Just did a segment on your photo." Liam was scrolling through news headlines when he stopped on one that made him laugh out loud. Listen to this. "When the overlooked sister stole the world's heart." I rolled my eyes, but the words landed deeper than I wanted to admit. Later that day, Olivia called. The screen flashed her name and I hesitated before answering. "Liv," she exhaled loudly, "you won." "What? You're all over the internet. Everyone's comparing our weddings. They're saying yours had soul, mine looked like a production." "I didn't plan this, Olivia." "You didn't have to," she said bitterly. "Mom says you did it on purpose. To humiliate us." "Mom would say that if I cured cancer," I said quietly. She went silent. "I didn't build this to hurt anyone, Liv. I just stopped letting her decide how I should live." Another long pause. Then, in a smaller voice, "Do you know how many people asked me if I wished my wedding looked like yours?" I didn't answer. There wasn't a kind way to respond. "Enjoy your fame," she said finally. "I hope it keeps you warm when you realize what you've done." And then she hung up. I sat there, staring at the phone, the ache creeping in, not guilt, not anger, but something sadder. She still didn't get it. Liam came up behind me, wrapping his arms around my shoulders. "She'll catch up eventually," he murmured. "I don't need her to," I said. "Not anymore." That evening, the yacht anchored near Capri. The sky turned lavender as the sun sank into the sea. Maria joined us for dinner, her laptop open to a dozen browser tabs. "Every outlet wants you," she said, "but I think you should choose one. Tell your story once in your words." I nodded slowly. "Not about rivalry. Not about revenge. About truth." "Exactly," she said. So I agreed to one interview with Art and Soul, a small magazine known for celebrating artists, not scandals. The editor's first question made me smile. "How did you manage to capture light so honestly?" I told her the truth. "Because I stopped hiding from it." When the issue came out a week later, the cover headline read, "The Woman Who Turned Betrayal into Beauty." Back in the States, the backlash began to shift. People started to question the family narrative that had painted me as difficult. My mother's attempts to control the story only made things worse. Screenshots of her old Facebook posts resurfaced. One journalist wrote, "Sometimes the villain isn't the loud one. Sometimes it's the one who insists on silence." For the first time, the weight of their version of me lifted. 6 months later, I was invited to London to receive the International Vision Award for photography. I almost didn't go, but Liam insisted. "You earned this," he said. The ballroom glowed with chandeliers and hushed excitement. When they called my name, I walked onto the stage, nerves buzzing under my skin. The applause felt like waves, steady, overwhelming, impossible to resist. The host handed me the award crystal and heavy in my hands. I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. For years, I said I hid behind the camera because I was told I didn't belong in the frame. But every story deserves light, especially the messy ones. The room went still. Then applause erupted. Cameras flashed, and for the first time, I didn't flinch from them. Afterward, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from my father. I watched the live stream. "I'm proud of you." I typed back before I could overthink it. "Thank you for finally seeing me." When we returned to Italy that night, the sea was calm again, the same shade of blue that had started it all. Liam and I stood on the deck, a warm wind brushing against our faces. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Not a single thing," he smiled. "Then what's next?" I thought for a moment. "I think I want to teach people how to find their own light." He kissed me, the soft kind of kiss that said I already knew that. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, I walked alone to the edge of the deck. The stars hung low over the water, the surface glimmering like glass. I thought about everything I'd lost, the approval, the illusion of belonging, and everything I'd gained in its place. Peace. Purpose. My name spoken on my own terms. They once told me I'd ruin a wedding. I ended up redefining one. As the yacht swayed gently under the night sky, I closed my eyes and whispered to the wind, "Light doesn't ask permission to shine." 6 months later, I woke to the sound of waves instead of alarms. The Amalfi morning light spilled through the glass windows of our small coastal home, painting the walls a soft gold. Liam was already up pacing the terrace with a mug in hand, his phone balanced on speaker. He was talking to Giovanni about the final paperwork for our foundation, our newest project, the Light Collective. I sat up watching him, and for a moment, I couldn't believe how much life had changed. No tabloids, no gossip, no apologies to chase. Just quiet purpose. When he hung up, he turned toward me. "It's official," he said. "The foundation is live." I smiled. "Then let's make sure no one ever has to ask permission to shine again." We'd started the foundation after my interview went viral, the one where I said, "Authenticity shouldn't require approval." Within weeks, hundreds of young photographers and artists had reached out sharing stories of being dismissed, silenced, or overshadowed. It became clear I wasn't the only one raised to play small. Now the Light Collective offered grants, mentorships, and creative retreats for artists who'd been told they weren't enough. Giovanni even donated his villa as our first residency site. After breakfast, we walked down to the dock to meet a group of new fellows, 3 photographers from Portugal, a writer from Chicago, and a painter from Seoul. They were young, raw, and hungry to create. One of them, a shy woman with curly hair and ink-stained fingers, approached me hesitantly. "You're Rachel Carter," she said, "the Light at Sea bride." I laughed softly. "I'm just Rachel. You can drop the title." She smiled, still nervous. "Your story, it made me stay in art school. My parents wanted me to quit, said I was wasting time. But then I saw your photo, the one with the light, and I thought maybe it's not too late to be seen." Her words hit something deep in me. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's never too late. Your vision matters." As we walked toward the villa together, I thought about the irony. The same light that once made my family resent me had now become a lifeline for others. That evening, after the fellows settled in, Liam and I sat on the terrace overlooking the sea. The horizon glowed orange, the same shade it had been the night of our wedding. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked. I didn't need to ask who he meant. Sometimes, I admitted, not with anger, more like curiosity. He nodded. "You've forgiven them, haven't you?" "I think I have," I said. "Not for them, for me." Forgiveness wasn't a grand declaration. It was small, quiet, and practical, like cleaning a wound before it scarred too deep. The next morning, while reviewing grant proposals, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line read, "Your mother asked me to send this." My stomach tightened. I opened it. Inside was a scanned letter, written in her neat, slanted handwriting. "Rachel, I saw the interview. You looked happy. Your father showed me the article about the foundation. I never understood why you needed the world to see you. Maybe now I do. If this is the life you wanted, then I hope it's everything I couldn't give you. Love, Mom." I read it twice, unsure what to feel. Relief, sadness, closure. Maybe all of it at once. When Liam came in, I handed him my phone. He read the letter silently, then met my eyes. "What are you going to do?" Nothing, I said. For once, I don't need to reply. He smiled. That's how you know it's over. That afternoon, I joined the fellows on the terrace as they photographed the coastline. The shy woman from earlier, her name was Clara, was crouched near a cluster of jasmine vines, adjusting her focus. "What are you looking for?" I asked. "The way the light hits imperfection," she said, without looking up. I smiled. "That's where the truth hides." She glanced up, grinning. "You sound like a teacher. Maybe I'm finally becoming one." Later, as dusk settled, I set up my old DSLR and began photographing them unposed, laughing barefoot in the fading light. The sound of the shutter felt like breathing. When I checked the screen, the images glowed with something raw, something honest. Liam walked up behind me. "Back behind the camera again." "Feels good," I said. "Feels right," he nodded. "You know this, what we're doing, it's bigger than us now." I looked out at the students, their laughter echoing against the cliffs. That's the point. That night we hosted a small dinner under the olive trees. Giovanni joined us, bringing a bottle of wine from his family's vineyard. To new beginnings, he toasted. Maria and Alex arrived the next day to film a short documentary about the foundation's work. She hugged me tightly. "Still can't believe this all started because your mom uninvited you from a wedding," she said with a laugh. "Neither can I admitted. Sometimes the best things grow from what we lose." She raised her glass. "To loss, then, and everything it teaches." By midnight, the guests had drifted away, leaving the soft hum of the sea behind. I stayed out on the terrace barefoot, the stone cool under my feet. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. I thought about that girl sitting on her apartment floor months ago, crying over spilled coffee and ruined photos, convinced her worth depended on someone else's approval. She had no idea this was waiting on the other side of her no. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo. It was Olivia. She was sitting on a park bench, her hair messy, no filters, no designer clothes. The caption read, "Sometimes it takes someone else's courage to find your own." I stared at it for a long moment, then sent a simple reply. "I'm glad you found the light. No anger, no edge, just truth." When I walked back inside, Liam was already half asleep, his arms stretched across the bed. I slid beside him and whispered, "She's starting to see." He murmured without opening his eyes, "Told you light spreads." Outside, waves whispered against the rocks, and I felt something I hadn't in years, peaceful and unshakable. The next morning, as the sun climbed over the horizon, I picked up my camera again. I didn't know what story I'd tell next, but I knew this much: it would begin with light. And this time, I wouldn't be behind it. I'd be standing right in it. The day of the exhibition felt like standing inside a dream I once thought was impossible. The gallery in Florence buzzed with quiet excitement, soft jazz in the background, the murmur of conversation, the clinking of champagne glasses. Photographs lined the white walls, each one glowing under warm light. Some were from our yacht wedding, others from the fellows in the Light Collective, and a few my favorites were taken by the young artists we'd mentored. Every frame told a story about defiance, about choosing truth over approval. Giovanni stood near the entrance, beaming as he greeted guests. Maria and Alex were adjusting cameras, documenting the event. Liam moved through the crowd, calm and proud, his hand brushing mine each time he passed. When the curator approached me, she smiled. "It's beautiful," she said. "You've turned pain into legacy." Her words settled over me like sunlight. That's all I ever wanted. We'd titled the exhibition "Stand Tall." At the center hung the photo that started it all, the halo shot from our wedding. The one that had circled the world, been reprinted in magazines, studied in art classes, and dissected by critics who tried to explain its magic. I never told them the truth, that it wasn't the light that made it powerful. It was freedom. As the crowd gathered around the centerpiece, the curator tapped her glass. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to welcome the artist whose courage redefined authenticity in modern photography, Rachel Carter." Applause rippled through the room. I stepped forward, heart, steady, voice calm. I spent most of my life behind the lens I began, capturing other people's happiness because I was too afraid to claim my own. But what I've learned is that the camera doesn't lie, it reflects what you refuse to see. The room went silent. For years I let others crop my story dull, my colors decide my frame. But light has a way of leaking in no matter how many walls you build around it. The moment I stopped asking for permission to exist, I realized something simple: standing tall isn't arrogance. It's honesty. Applause filled the gallery again, louder this time. I caught Liam's eyes across the room, steady, warm, unshakable, and felt that familiar calm wash over me. After the speech, people crowded around the photos. A journalist from Vanity Fair asked, "What's next for you?" I smiled. "Whatever feels honest." Later that night, after the crowd thinned, I wandered to the far corner of the gallery, where a small installation featured letters from our fellow artists who'd found courage through the foundation. One note, handwritten in ink smudged with fingerprints, read, "Because of you, I stopped apologizing for wanting to be seen." I traced the words with my finger, tears stinging my eyes. Liam appeared beside me, slipping his hand into mine. "You okay?" "I'm better than okay," I said softly. "I'm seen," he smiled, pulling me close. "You've built something that's going to outlast us." Outside, Florence hummed with nighttime energy, voices echoing off cobblestones, music spilling from open doors. We walked together down a narrow street, lined with glowing shop windows. My heels clicked softly against the pavement. When we reached the Ponte Vecchio, the bridge glowed gold against the Arno River. Liam stopped and leaned on the railing, watching the water. "You know," he said, 16 months ago, you were sitting on our apartment floor, surrounded by broken mugs and ruined photos." I laughed quietly. "Yeah. I remember every second of it." "What changed?" he asked. I turned to him, the city's reflection shimmering in his eyes. "I stopped living like a shadow in my own story." He smiled. "You think your mom will ever come see one of your exhibits?" "Maybe," I said. "But she doesn't need to. I've stopped performing for an audience that refuses to look up." He squeezed my hand. "And your sister, she's finding her way," I said. "She's learning that love isn't a competition." We stood in silence for a while, watching the river carry the city's light downstream. The next morning we flew back to Amalfi. When we arrived, the sea stretched wide and endless waves glittering under the afternoon sunday. I walked out to the deck of our villa, the same view I'd stared at months ago, when I'd first told my mother I was getting married. Except this time there was no fear, no doubt, just clarity. On the table sat a new letter delivered that morning. It was from Olivia. "Rachel, your story's everywhere now. I saw your exhibition photos. I didn't expect to cry, but I did. I think I finally get it. You didn't steal anything from me. You just stopped giving me permission to shine in your place. I hope someday I can do the same." I read the letter twice, then smiled. The old me would have replied right away, desperate to heal the rift. But this version of me knew better. Some bridges rebuild themselves slowly when the water is calm enough to reflect. That evening I stood barefoot on the terrace as the sun dipped low, painting everything gold. Liam joined me, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Do you ever miss who you were before?" he asked quietly. I thought about that woman, the one who whispered instead of spoke, who measured her worth in family approval, who made herself small just to fit. "No," I said. "I miss who she could have been sooner." He smiled. "You became her anyway." The waves below rolled softly, their rhythm syncing with my heartbeat. I lifted my camera one last time, framing the horizon. The light caught just right, gold, honest, unfiltered. I pressed the shutter. Click. The image froze, perfect in its imperfection. The sea stretching into infinity, the sun melting into it, and two figures standing together, unafraid of the light. That night, as we sat under the stars, Maria called. "The foundation's site just hit 1 million views," she said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "People from 30 countries have donated. You've started something real, Rachel." I looked at Liam, smiling. "No," I said. "We started it." When the call ended, I leaned back, watching the constellations scatter above us. Somewhere far away, my family still lived, inside their carefully curated perfection, their polished smiles and polished pain. I didn't hate them anymore. I just no longer needed their story to complete mine. I turned to Liam, my voice soft. "Do you ever think about how all of this started?" He nodded. "You were excluded. And now," he said, brushing his thumb over my wedding band, "you're the one who opened the door for everyone else who was." I smiled, the breeze warm against my face. Funny how rejection was the invitation I needed. He laughed. "That's your next quote for the foundation." "Maybe it's the title of my book," I said, teasing. "Whatever it is," he whispered, "you'll make it honest." The sea shimmered under the moonlight, quiet and infinite. For a long time I just sat there, breathing it in, the sound of freedom, the smell of salt and jasmine, the steady heartbeat of a life I'd built from everything they tried to take away. I once thought revenge was proving them wrong. Now I know it's simply living right. And if you're still listening to my story, if you've ever been told you're too much, too loud, too bright, remember this: your light isn't a threat. It's proof that you survived. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever had to fight to stand tall again. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story I'll tell might just be yours.